Okay, and we are recording. Welcome, everybody. My name is Donnie
Okay.
and
Kirk
Kirk
Prime.
Prime, my beloved husband, and we are delighted to be with you and welcome you to another chapter of Queer Tribes. And today we are indeed graced by the presence of Kaelan. Kaelan is here with us, and he's going to talk to us about some interesting stuff. And let me give you some thoughts about Kaelan. You may already know him. He has a very extensive and popular YouTube's channel, which I'm sure he'll tell us a little
Or
about.
Instagram.
Instagram as well. I'm sure many other things I don't even know about. But let's find out a little bit about Kaelan, and then we're going to talk to him for a while. So, Kaelan is an ecstatic spiritual life coach. After spending 7 years living in a yogic ashram where he taught yoga and meditation, he went on to lead workshops around the world on empathy, communication, and leadership skills. In 2020, he launched a spiritual life coaching practice called Ecstatic Self and published his first book, Journey to the Ecstatic Self, and began his well-known YouTube channel. He's published his second book, a queer coming of age fantasy story, and coaches men around the globe to reconnect with their wild cosmic truths.
Hmm.
He is married to the love of his life and has a dog and a cat. Wow, that's quite a lot. So, welcome, Kaylin. We're so delighted you're here. Thank you for joining us today.
Such a sincere pleasure, and I need to update that bio because we actually have two dogs.
Ah,
Oh,
And a third book came out last year with a matching Oracle deck, so yeah, I need to update that.
oh,
yeah, you
yeah.
do. You do. You need to. Yeah. Well, and let people know about the many offerings that they can imbibe upon. So yeah, that's great. So, Kaylin, as Donnie kind of framed this queer tribe conversation, we've been doing this for over 10 years now. Just asking uh, brothers, especially in our community, about their stories. And so the first question is just that, tell us about your spiritual awakenings. Tell us stories about that of coming to fruition and where you're at now. So that's the first question. And again, we have 45 minutes, and this one probably can take as much time as you need. So
Well, thank you for the space. Thank you for having me here.
yeah.
Um, my life really is dedicated to spiritual growth, whether it's my own or walking beside others on their spiritual journey and creating space for queer and same gender loving men to be able to go on that journey together, I think is so immensely sacred. I'm a huge believer in the sacredness of the outsider experience and the queer experience, and there just being such a dearth of those spaces in the world. So,
Yeah.
thank you guys for consciously cultivating space for men to gather and to see that those qualities that society often says are limitations are actually often the biggest gateways. Um, and I couldn't be more thrilled to see work like this being done. So thank you, thank you, thank you for creating
Mhm.
space for others. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the Chicagoland region. And from the time I was probably about this tall, I knew I was weird and different. Probably starting 6 years old, people would look at me and say, "There's something strange about you. You're
Ah,
uncomfortable."
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's true. Like being queer, being neurodivergent, being somebody who was very spiritually attuned at a young age, I always felt like there was something, a language that I heard that others didn't hear, and a language they did that I did not.
Yeah.
As I'm sure many people in this room can relate to.
Yeah.
I can also remember being very attuned to things beyond just the Christian notion of spirituality from a young age. I can remember in first grade sitting at my desk and suddenly just becoming profoundly aware of myself breathing. And
Mm.
then, like,
Mm.
just from the breath, like a feeling of like an almost orgasmic wave rushing through me and
Mm.
feeling colors swirl around me and leaving my body. We
Mm.
lived on the edge of a forest, and I would go out and feel like the trees were sentient and alive and connect with them, and that the
Mm.
water was something more than just a pond. Like from a young age, having a much more animist, connected,
Mm.
mycelial version of spirituality rather than some hierarchical storm god, sky
Mhm.
father
Mhm.
that you hear about in more Abrahamic faith traditions.
Yeah.
So as I got older, I started to really quest. I really started to want to know, what does it mean to be connected with a spirituality that is more relational, more personal than the one I was
Mm.
into. And being alive in the Midwest in the 90s, I was born in 1987. There was not good answers for that. Like I remember going to the library and there weren't books. You could find books on magic or Wicca, but not quite what I was looking for. In college, I started visiting different traditions. I went to the Baha'i Temple in Evanston, Illinois. I joined a couple different groups, and nothing really felt like it fit
Mhm.
until I started getting into yoga and meditation.
Mhm.
And I encountered this group that was based in Kashmir Shaivite philosophy and Shiva Shakti Tantra, and got very involved with them. I went and visited their main ashram in Colorado the summer before my senior year, did a yoga teacher training there, met their guru, had some really profound energetic experiences, had an experience of Kundalini awakening during that trip, and decided I'm all in. And so I got very, very invested in that. Moved into one of their meditation centers. That one was in downtown Chicago. Was there for almost 7 years. Um, but in 2016, there was an abrupt rupture for me within that tradition. I had already felt like I was outgrowing it. I had come to realize that the teacher figure is a wonderful gift to have, but that you're still responsible for your own growth. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, in a lot of spiritual hierarchical traditions, that idea of independence doesn't vibe well with a guru figure. A lot of times, they want you to stay in a state of subjugation, and this tradition was more cult-like than I was aware.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
one day, I stood up to defend a young trans person who was being attacked by the guru and his wife for being trans, and
Mhm.
was unceremoniously thrown out because of that.
Um,
And in hindsight, it's what needed to happen. I was outgrowing the tradition and I wouldn't have left of my own volition. And it allowed me to start my own journey of reclaiming the spirituality from my youth and also starting to explore other perspectives, other teachers, other writings, other traditions. And so for the next couple of years, there was a lot more of fact gathering, fact finding, reading lots of spiritual books that were not part of that lineage, visiting other teachers, traditions, workshops, that sort of thing. But one of the things that really started to hit home for me was I was always feeling like a guest in somebody else's house.
mhm.
That it didn't matter how open a tradition might be, if you're not born into that lineage and if you're not born into
Mhm.
that culture or that race or that background,
Mhm.
even if they're open, there's still this feeling of you're just a guest.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
didn't sit well within my soul. I kind of started to use the term spiritual orphanhood, the
Mhm.
feeling of saying, I'm not Christian, all right? There's issues with every faith tradition, but modern Christianity as it's practiced just doesn't vibe with me.
Mhm.
Love the teachings of Christ, don't like the tradition.
Yeah.
I don't have connections with the Northern European faith traditions that my ancestors would have practiced.
Mhm.
I don't have blood lineage in Eastern esoteric traditions. So, what does it mean to find a spirituality that is native to me, that is
Mhm.
appropriate for the 20th century, that is queer celebratory, which most are not, frankly? And I started to really say, what does it mean to take all of the deep learning that I've acquired in these different spaces, strip away the religiosity, strip away the dogma, strip away the cultural context, and just find those eternal truths that exist across culture and across time. And rather than synchronize, just reveal what has always been beneath.
Mhm.
So that has been my journey for the last several years. As you mentioned in my intro, in 2020, I had a big career shift. The pandemic happened. My day job ended, thankfully, and I had unemployment for a year and a half. So during that time, I wrote my first book. I started my YouTube channel. I started coaching people, and it really was what felt like everything my life had been leading up to that point, giving me the skills to be able to do those things. Whether it was my college education in acting and filmmaking, or my day job that I had the 4 years prior in public speaking, or my work teaching yoga and meditation, it just kind of all came together with creating a social media presence and putting myself out there in that way. And I always pay attention to when the universe seems to be saying yes to something, when there's that great state of flow and people are just reaching out and saying, yes, keep doing this, keep doing this.
Mhm.
And that was my response right away. So since 2020, I've been very active on social media. Um, YouTube was my biggest channel for a while. A lot of people also know me through my more naked, embodied content on X. Um, People now more Instagram and TikTok sometimes find me. Sometimes people find me through my books. But yeah, I've now written 3 books. I'm on my fourth one that will maybe coming out this summer. We will see. My last one, we did a Kickstarter to fundraise for the book and the matching Oracle deck, and it was fully funded in 3 days. We raised
mm,
over $26,000 to produce it, so that was
mm,
a fantastic milestone last year.
mm,
And me and my husband have the near term goal of creating physical space for especially my queer brothers and queer siblings to gather and to have space where you can be embodied and together and breathing and naked, and all of yourself is welcome to show up. So we currently do that by hosting retreats and workshops, but hopefully in this next year or so, we're going to have a physical space where we can just have regular offerings so people can drop in whenever they want.
mm, mm,
But my partner's been a huge part of this whole journey. We've been together for 11 years. He is my inspiration and my guide. And when we first met, he was the one who's like, I want to start a retreat center. And
mm,
I just see you as you just radiate as somebody who's meant to be a spiritual guide.
mm,
And so he's always been my biggest resource and always finding my true north. So
mm,
I'm excited to see what we continue to create together because as we know, we are always better together and that
mm,
these journeys are
mm.
not meant to be walked in isolation.
Yeah. Wow. Anything else about, I mean, I'm sure you could take little pieces of all of that and expand them in all the books that you've written, but anything further you want to share about your spiritual journey that leads you to our next question. So,
I would say the one of the big things that has become a very central tenet for me is the sacredness of the human experience, and
yeah.
that the human experience is the point. And I think this is something you guys probably very much relate to. But having studied quite deeply in a non-dualist Eastern tradition, even in those, there's this subtle hierarchy around here's the human experience, but we're really working towards enlightenment, or we're working towards transcendence, or
Mm, mm,
purification, nirvana, whatever it is
mm, mm,
you prefer. And one of the things I've really come to believe is that's frankly bullshit. I
mm,
don't believe in this idea of final enlightenment. I don't believe in this idea from
mm,
release of the cycle of reincarnation or the wheel of samskara or those things because I don't believe there is real endings. Even if you think, oh, I remerge back into the oneness and I become one with all, great. The oneness is always spilling out new universes, new realities, new galaxies.
mm,
You're going to end up back in the cycle, even if you
mm,
break free.
mm,
It's inevitable. So what if we start seeing this human life as being a true gift? That this isn't something we're here to transcend. It's not something we're here to escape. It's what we chose to inhabit, and to see our bodies as sacred. To say, if I'm going to be fully human, that means releasing all the shame that we've been taught, that there's no such thing as a dirty part of ourselves, that our body isn't sinful, our sex life isn't dirty or sinful, our penises are sacred, and starting to just reclaim wholeness and say, this is all of me. There's a lot of lip service paid to the idea of wholeness in spiritual work, but you're still being told, leave your dick at the door, or that's
right,
not appropriate, or that's not spiritual.
right.
And I think everything is and can be spiritual, and to just
Mm,
reclaim that and see that this life you're living right now is the blessing. It's not what's going to happen once you reach a certain level of empowerment or have a certain awakening. This is the blessing right now, and
yeah.
to really celebrate.
Mm, mm. Oh, that was juicy. Yeah, yeah. We could end the call right there and I'd go, wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, I know. I know in our community, our whole sense of work is kind of embodied in what you just said, which is, our body is sacred, like what Whitman, was always chiming about for us that, these bodies are sacred and coming home to this body and really fully being present in it. That's the gift of now. And yeah, so you summarized that so well. I love it. Which leads us so graciously, though, into the next question. And so, tribe, we've had 10 years of people talking about, do they see us as a queer tribe? How do they see us as a queer tribe? The attributes of being tribe. But tell us, how do you see us as a queer tribe? Um, uh, Especially, I heard a lot about kind of the wisdom that I call upon a lot is more indigenous oftentimes, that everybody in the tribe is an essential part of the tribe. And everybody brings a gift, and every tribe has its own gifts. So I'm wondering, how do you see us as a queer tribe? Any thoughts and musings about that is welcome.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that a lot of indigenous traditions are really beautiful about is this perspective of the sacredness of the queer experience, and how in North America a lot of indigenous traditions would hold those who were born to spirit, or whatever term they might use, as holding a unique place as negotiator, as the boundary holder between the sacred and the mundane, as the intervener between conflict, or between the divine and the human. And I think a lot of Western spirituality has been afraid of queerness as a spiritual power.
Mhm.
But I really do think if you go back pre-patriarchy, pre-industrialization, that actually wasn't an uncommon idea, that queerness in itself was a very sacred demarcator. Because to be born queer means that you were somebody who from birth is different. You're different from your parents. You're likely different from your siblings. And that means you have one foot in this world and one foot in the other world. You're on the fringe. And I think we as queer men have a natural aptitude to connect with spirit, and therefore have a duty to use those abilities to help benefit society. I often bring up the fact that a lot of the things that are tropes in gay culture, like partying and drug use and sex, those are all ritualistic tools. Those are all tools that can be
Mhm.
used
Mhm.
ceremoniously
Mhm.
to connect us with the divine.
Mhm.
And I think part of the reason we're drawn to that as a gay culture is the fact that that's actually what our role is supposed to be. We are meant to be the ones who venture over into the realm of the disembodied, the ethereal, the chaotic, the spiritual, the formless, and then report back and help guide others through that journey. And so I think it's part of our cellular DNA that we enjoy sex, that we enjoy, exploring with psychedelics, that we enjoy, you know, group dance, that we enjoy these
Mhm.
things because they can be ritualistic tools,
Yes.
but because our culture doesn't
Thank you.
honor the queer experience, and it doesn't honor, hey, you have a natural aptitude towards these things, you have a natural ability
Yeah.
to connect and be a space holder in this way, we flounder. And that's why I think there is such rampant depression in the gay
Mhm.
world, and
Mhm.
so much of an issue with self harm, self abuse, with domestic violence, with depression and disassociation, is because we're disconnected from purpose and we're disconnected from each other.
Mhm.
To be born as an outsider, which I do believe every queer person is, we are born outsiders
Mhm.
because we don't see ourselves reflected in our immediate surroundings, is
Mhm.
inherently a traumatic event.
Yeah.
Before you know you're gay, you know you're different.
Yeah.
Before you know you're not gender typical, you know you're different.
Yeah.
And different is dangerous because it's hardwired in our DNA that if you're different from everyone else in your tribe, you can get excommunicated.
Yeah.
You can end up alone on the glacier starving. And so from ages 4, 5, 6, we don't know how to name it, but we know we have to pretend. We have to fake ourselves. We have to fit in. We have to guard. We have to become the best. We have to do something to protect. And so we have all of these men and all of these people wandering around with damages that they're not healing, that they're not working to resolve.
Yeah.
And we know that the traumas can be the place where the light enters you. We
Yeah.
know that those challenges can end up being the gateways that open to something so much greater. But if you don't do the work, then it just continues to perpetuate harm. And so we see the quote unquote gay community in the broadest sense being very fractured and very broken and doing a lot of harm to each other and to themselves.
Mhm.
But when you take those traumas and you take those differences and you actually realize there's a gift in there and there's a potential in there, and
Mhm.
we do that healing work and we start to connect with purpose and we start to realize we have an aptitude towards spirit,
Mhm.
then we're actually able to come together like you guys are creating
Mhm.
and create true spirit queer community that
Yeah.
is spiritual, and to say, hey, these wounds actually give me access to really profound insight, and my desire for love and connection
Yeah.
and my desire for doing all of these things that are part of gay life are actually ritualistic tools that I can use for the betterment of myself, for others, and for society as a whole. So I think we have the capacity to form a tremendous tribe of brave hearted, open individuals.
Mhm.
And by and large, as a society, I don't think that's happening. I mean,
Yeah,
you look at the number of people who,
yeah,
will be out tonight partying until 4 a.m. versus the number of people who are sitting in community, sitting in sangha, sitting in kulas, sitting in circles,
mhm.
doing those deep spiritual things. There's a vast, but I think that's really where the work is, and my hope is that we continue to do the work, and we continue to heal, and we continue to open up to our aptitudes. And I do think that is happening. I think more and more people are meditating and going on vision quests and attending events like this. The more that we'll step into the that part of ourself, the more we'll start to find that community, and the more we'll heal collectively and as a culture.
Wow. Wow. You're overdoing my expectations of how the depth and breadth
Hmm.
that's embodied for you that I believe, but there's so few of us who are speaking kind of the same language, even though I think we're all seeking the same path. So you've elegantly put all that together. I'll put a couple footnotes just from my own experience and to bridge to the next question. You know, I got to hear Harry Hay before he died, and he was talking about Thomas Huxley and the biologist who specifically just said, well, if there's a species that replicates itself over and over and over and over and over, millennia after millennia, then it's necessary for the survival and the well-being of the whole. And so for me as a queer tribe, I think the fact that we just keep showing up, we're a part of the creation, the magic of the creation and the creator, if you want to call that. But we're needed to bring about the change, the healing, the gifts that are going to weave us all together. And to suppress us is indeed suppressing ourselves and suppressing the gifts of healing that the world is so hungry for.
Mm-hmm.
So so there's that little tidbit. And then the other one, just to reinforce, one of my teachers for a very brief time was Melodoma Somé, but in the Dagara tribe of Africa, the gay men, which they don't call them gay men, they're the different ones. The different ones, though, are automatically given the role as kind of the oracles of the tribe, and so they go into caves. But what's kind of the hidden secret is that they go in their caves, and part of their ecstatic uh, opening to, they're called the gatekeepers, opening the gates between the worlds and to receive the wisdom is they start making love with each other, not as lovers, but to get into ecstatic spaces so they're open channels to receive whatever the wisdom is that the tribe might need. So, so you have so eloquently put all of that together in kind of common uh, queerdom terms that I think everybody can easily resonate with. And when I start talking about some of that stuff, people kind of glaze over and go, oh, that's cool, but that's them, rather than really seeing, oh, but no, that's us now. So thank you for all that. Yeah.
100%. I mean, like, people, a lot of people find me online because they'll have like seen a video of me masturbating, and I'm like, it's a sacred practice. It is a
Yes.
practice to cultivate your energy, to
Yes.
open you to ecstatic states,
Yes.
to greater levels of awareness,
Yeah.
to cultivate more life force that you can use for whatever purpose in your worldly life, in your spiritual life. It creates a form of connection with other people. It opens you to a state of joy. Like, it is a profound practice. Whether you're doing that alone, whether you're making love with another, like, it is an essential part
Yeah.
of spiritual work. And I think that's also part of the reason that so many spiritual traditions downplay it or make sex taboo. Is
Mhm.
it is our life force generator. Like, it
Yeah.
is. literally the pump that turns the water and brings it up out of the ground.
Yeah.
It is so entirely necessary.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Great. So bridging um, to our next question then. So as a tribe, as men who love men, or what you call us, the outsiders, us outsiders that um, what is your vision for us outsiders? What do you
Mm.
what's your vision for us as a movement, especially in the times in the world in which we're inhabiting?
Yeah. In my new book that I'm writing, which is subtitled The Ecstatic Path, so I'm right with you guys on that term. Um, I use the word radical a lot, but I use it in a way that isn't typically thought of because I think there is a quiet type of radicalness of actually finding joy,
Hmm.
actually inhabiting a wonderful life,
Hmm.
of being happy, of being connected,
Hmm.
of being in a circle with other people who you meet with your mind, with your heart, with your body,
Hmm.
with your spirit,
Hmm.
to allow space for silliness,
Hmm.
for whimsy, a space for passion,
Hmm.
a space for deep, meaningful present connection rather than just distraction.
Yeah.
And all of that, I think, is a radical alternative, some might even say rejection of our contemporary culture. Our contemporary culture that wants us to numb and to medicate and disassociate. The contemporary culture that wants us to consume more and bury our feelings in shopping and a new product and something faster and shinier and
Mm.
more impressive. A culture that wants us to be afraid.
Mhm.
And this is something that I've been seeing more, especially in this last year, more than any other time in my life, where they want us to be afraid.
Mhm.
Because when somebody gets angry or afraid, their amygdala, their lizard brain takes over, your vision tunnels, you make reactive choices rather than intelligent choices,
Yeah.
and you're much easier to control.
Yeah.
Your, your reactions become much more predictable
Yeah.
versus if you're in a state of joy and embodiment and bliss, it's much harder to control you. It's much harder to predict your outcome. And so they force us into this consumerist, fearful, disassociated, disconnected mindset because then we become pawns, we become lemmings, we become things where forces greater than ourselves, whether you want to think of it as the government or corporations or societal forces, whatever you want to think of it, can then use us to whatever ends they want. But somebody who is radically happy,
Yeah.
radically embodied,
Yeah.
radically joyful, radically connected to a tribe and community
Yeah.
are self sufficient.
Yeah.
They don't need society in the way that other people do. They don't need that trip to the mall to go buy that thing or Amazon. They don't need to pay for another Netflix subscription. They don't need to
Mhm.
tune into the news station. They don't need
Mhm.
social media. They don't need to
Mhm.
pay advertisers in the
Mhm.
way that everybody does typically through their doom scrolling. And to act that way, if everybody did it, if everyone in the world started to behave that way, our society would collapse because it needs that fear and that doom scrolling and that engagement and that numbing to function now. And so, if we, as people who are consciously cultivating that state, if we can fully embody that, it becomes a radical act in this time. It becomes radical in these times to say, "This is me, take me or leave me. I don't give a shit." Now, I live in Washington, D.C., which is culturally probably the most conservative city in the United States.
Mhm. Mhm.
Everybody around here wears really ill-fitting, unattractive suits and plays very standard gender roles. And even if you go to Pride in Washington D.C., they're wearing fucking khakis and polo shirts. You know, it is so buttoned up, and I choose almost every day to walk out of the house in a utility kilt, a modern utility kilt, a T-shirt with like a mandala or Hanuman or some sort of spiritual phrase on it, like an Hermes shawl and a fedora hat. Not because I'm trying to be, intimidating, but because those are the things that genuinely bring me joy. And
Yeah.
I genuinely feel beautiful
Yeah.
dressing that way. Even though people will scowl at me on the streets in DC, being like, what the fuck is wrong with that guy? But you know what? I'm living from joy. And
Yeah.
for me to choose to leave the house every day that way, not because I'm trying to have an impact, not because I'm trying to intimidate anyone, but because I'm genuinely dressing for myself in a way that feels aligned for me and
Yeah.
joyful, I do think is a radical act in these times. And at a time where conservative agenda is really pushing us towards gender norms and traditional quote unquote society, to embrace queerness, to embrace whimsy, to embrace playfulness, to embrace silliness, to embrace just being yourself is a radical act against those things. And so this is where I think queer people really excel. And this is, I think, our duty as a queer society is to do our own healing. So it's not reactive against that. We're not doing it because we're angry, because anger begets anger. I don't think it usually leads to a good outcome. We do it because we're whole. We
Yeah.
do it because we're genuinely fulfilled and we're genuinely nourished by the people that we're surrounding ourselves with and the practices we're doing and the communities we're forming and the homes we're building and the rituals we do. And so that pours out of us and how we show up in the world. And, maybe I'll pass someone today who sees me walking down the street and their initial reaction is, whoa, that's weird. But then they keep thinking about it and suddenly say, but why don't I do that? Why don't I make the choice of choosing what feels aligned for me and fuck what society says? Why
Mhm.
am I following this script even though it doesn't feel authentic for me?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because even with our straight brothers and sisters, they too are hedged into tropes
Mhm.
and behaviors and ways of
Mhm.
showing up that are not authentic to them.
Yeah.
And so the more that we can just embody being our joyful, authentic, real selves, I think we give permission for everybody else to start to open up to their truth and their joy and their bliss. And to realize, even in these chaotic, frustrating times that we're living in, these times that feel so unprecedented, that there is still room for those things. And to give over to the malaise, to give over to the fear, is exactly what they want.
Mhm.
And so it is quietly revolutionary, it is quietly rebellious
Mhm.
to say, this is me. I'm not making myself smaller. I'm not making myself digestible to you. And if you think I'm a lot to swallow, respectfully, you may choke on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, if I have a takeaway from what you just said, it would be joy and genuineness are our resistance. And it is because we are truly just being who we are, who we're called to be, who we're unlayering. My one of the teachers that speaks to me most is actually Rumi, but Rumi's all the time talking about, our job's not to seek love, but to remove the barriers that keep us from loving. So what I hear is unpacking, play with our wounds, find out what the treasures are within us, awaken to that joy, be in that playfulness, and you're genuinely going to change the world because you're being genuine. So that's yummy.
Yeah, and what you just said exactly, I'm fully on board with because I too agree that you have everything you need inside of you.
Yeah,
Growing isn't necessarily about reaching out and trying to become more or accumulate more or learn more.
yeah,
It's about stripping off all those things that are inhibiting that perfection, that light, that bliss that already lives within you, that you are already whole.
yeah,
It's just letting go of the things that get in the way.
absolutely. Great, great. All right. So before we close, we want to do two things. One is tell us about anything that you have coming up that you might want folks to know about, or how they might access you for any of the services that you provide.
Sure. So my website is ecstaticself.com. Signing up for my mailing list on there is a great way to get updated about current offerings that I have or things that are coming up. Um, Very blessed right now to be at a point where most of the things I announce sell out pretty quickly. So, like, I've got a retreat in Vermont in June. That one is sold out. It's waitlist only at this point. We've got a couple events here in DC in our home space in the next month. Those are sold out, but I will be announcing more in the coming weeks.
Good.
I do work with people one on one. And I have a Patreon, I have an OnlyFans, I have all the different platforms. But the main thing is, like I said, my goal is to try and create space for people to gather. And my newest book that I'm working on, one of my supporters was really encouraging me to do something that was a little more philosophical in the sense of how do you walk this path? Like how do you actually do this ecstatic work?
Mhm.
And so that's what my newest book is really trying to focus on, is giving people a really practical
Mm.
guidebook to that sort of terrain. So I think it's something that probably resonate with your tribe. I'd love to
Yeah,
share it with you
absolutely.
when it comes out.
Yeah,
Uh,
excellent, excellent. Thank you.
so
Okay, so Ecstatic
feel
Self is
free to somewhere.
ecstaticself.com is probably the major place for them to kind of stay connected with what you're doing, what you're producing, what you're putting out there. Great. And I think that if folks, if you're watching this, it also will be listed on the archive if you're watching this video. So great, excellent. And then while there are a few men among us, I'd invite each one, if you have a quick question, very brief question, uh, for Kaelan, to just kind of raise your hand and unmute yourself. And um, otherwise, we will call it a night because I think we've covered some really wonderful stuff. But anybody have a quick question or comment? Okay. Well, thank you, brothers, who are on, and all of you who will watch this call for however long the internet exists. And thank you, Kaylin, for your work and
Hmm.
for for me, I feel like I've just met somebody who I resonate with so deeply on this inward path that brings the outward uh, into manifestation. So I really, really thank you and say to all of you and from Donnie and I, namaste for tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Kaylin.
Thank you. And if any of you find yourself in DC, please do reach out. I'd love to grab a cup of tea and catch up.
Oh,
Absolutely. We
yes.
may just do that.
Hmm.
Yeah, sounds like there are a few things I'd love to consult with you about. So,
Yes.
For sure.
yeah. All
Thank
All
you,
right.
right.
guys.
Signing off, everyone.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
everyone,
you,
for
one.
joining us. Till our next episode, be safe, be well. Namaste, beloveds.